Oh, Allie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Excited for the spring weather that's seemingly on the horizon here in Boston. I know we're both located in Boston, so this is really exciting.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm also equally thrilled that I just happened, Allison Byers was a previous guest on the show with Scroobius, and she was just like toting on you on LinkedIn and loving on you guys, and I was like, oh, this is
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah,
Yeah. I know it
that's
was cool to see for sure. It's nice to be involved in the ecosystem in Boston. It's like such a cool ecosystem to be a part of.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know if you're involved with Startup Boston at all, but we've had Stephanie Rulick on the show as well, and she's been a great supporter of what we're doing. And Startup Boston is an amazing, amazing program that she runs.
Yeah, I was actually at one of their events last week, so
Oh,
there's a
fun.
lot of
See,
overlap.
there you
Yeah.
go. So much overlap. Well, great. So before we jump into, the inspiration behind Borrow, your organization, your company, how about just a couple minutes of like just introduce yourself to us, Allie, please.
Yeah, of course. So my
Yeah.
name is Allie Reeves. I am the CEO and co-founder of Borrow. Borrow is a fashion rental technology company and marketplace.
Mhm.
We are aiming to combat the vast over consumption and overproduction in the fashion industry
Sure.
by extending the life cycle of garments and making the system more circular.
I love it.
And then a little bit about me. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, now
Nice.
living in Boston, as mentioned. Yeah, and I've had a very nonlinear path to entrepreneurship. So I,
Everyone always does.
yeah, so I always like, and I love what you guys are doing, highlighting female entrepreneurship
Thank you.
and women founders and operators. So always excited to chat about my journey and provide any guidance or help to anyone along the way.
Awesome, awesome. So what was your background, Allie? What did you train in, and what did you do predominantly before you started Borrow?
Yeah, so I studied television and film screenwriting at Syracuse University, actually. So I thought
Great
that I,
program. Great
yeah,
program for television. Yeah.
yeah, it was an amazing experience. I thought that I wanted to be a screenwriter and a
Mhm.
development exec at production companies. And I pursued that a little bit after graduation. So I worked
Mhm.
on really cool shows. I worked at Project Runway and Watch What Happens Live in the production departments, kind of by way of just like not being a 23-year-old
Yeah.
old and not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. I took a job at a marketing agency in New York where I did experiential and out of home media buying and
Oh,
planning,
interesting.
um,
Yeah.
which was also a really great experience. But I ultimately was like, I'm working so much in spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And
This is not for
it just
me. Yeah.
wasn't as I was missing that creative element that I was
Right.
found through the entertainment industry.
Sure.
um Kind of did a couple of career pivots. I ended up then working in PR for a couple of years. I did
Fun.
food and bev PR for a while. Got a job at a big agency in New York doing integrated marketing for a
Mhm.
variety of different types of clients. And then landed at an agency that worked with primarily like startup founders, which is where
Very
I got
cool.
my first taste of the
Yeah.
the
Entrepreneurship.
startup
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And I think I always had known that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, or I always had like an entrepreneurial sort of fire, I guess.
Sure.
I was like always the kid that had a lemonade stand every weekend in the summer. And I remember in the first grade, I started my own jewelry company, and
Nice.
I was like making jewelry at home and selling them to my fellow first grade students. And I remember I got in trouble for that.
That's awesome.
But I think that I always knew I wanted to do something of my own and have something of my own. And so being able to see that firsthand working at the agency in New York was really great. Working with founders was really great. And then I ended up taking a job as the director of marketing for a Boston-based startup. I was the
Nice.
first hire at that company, which was really exciting. I got to see like really from the ground up how
Yeah.
it all got built. And then just like had the light bulb moment with my co-founder for Borrow after about a year and a half of working at that other company, decided to take the leap of faith and just sort of pursue this full time. And yeah,
Awesome. I love it.
I
Oh my
got
God,
here.
so much to get into. So first things first, you and I are going to do another show about Project Runway, just about Project Runway, because
Okay. Yes, I loved it.
I was a huge fan for like the first several seasons.
Okay.
But no, just kidding. But interestingly enough, um, I love the path. of
Mhm.
sort of like the creative to something that was less creative, back to creative, and then, everything that you did to found the organization. I love also the entrepreneurial spirit that has run through you since a very young age, right?
Yes.
When I was a little kid, there was a kid on the bus who used to sell candy for like a profit. Like he would buy it and then he would sell it for a profit on the bus because look,
Right.
captive audience, right? And people were willing to buy it. So I always admired that initiative, if you will, right? So you
Totally.
mentioned fast fashion, Allie, and I don't want to throw shade on any brands, but there's a lot of them out there, right?
Hmm.
And I just came back from a trip to Savannah, Georgia, where you may be familiar with with SCAD, the
Hmm.
Savannah College of Art and Design, and there's so much like resell and vintage sort of like consignment. They're like on every shop, and they're run by a lot of SCAD alumni, and
Yeah.
or they feature a lot of their products. So let's just talk a little bit about this issue of overconsumption in the fashion industry and the fast fashion, and where do you think your impact will be with Borrow there, Allie?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, the fashion industry used to have 4 seasons a year. Now there's
Mm.
52 micro seasons, which is
Every
crazy. And
week, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I think that that's just been driven by social media and the way that we're
Sure.
consuming content, and trends are
Yeah,
moving so fast these days that
crazy.
it's economically, most people can't afford to buy
Yeah,
something of
sure.
quality every time
Every
that
week.
yeah,
Yeah.
every time
Yeah.
they want to experience newness in their closets. And you mentioned the resale industry. The resale industry is growing like 21 times faster than the
Mm,
retail industry. It's so
mm,
popular with young consumers just because the price point's better. People are really trying to find, I think, individuality in their own styles and in
sure.
their own closets. I think with rental, where we see this huge opportunity and gray area is, sometimes there is something that you don't want to get rid of, but you're not wearing enough to justify maybe the amount of money
Holding
you
on to it.
spent on it. And
Yes.
so we saw this opportunity for, like, you have something hanging in your closet that you wear maybe once or twice a year because it's a special piece, it's an occasion wear piece. You
Sure.
don't really want to get rid of it through resale because you might want to wear it again someday. So how do you justify that price point that you've spent on that garment? So
Right.
we identified this opportunity for users to be able to rent out those pieces to make
Mm,
passive income back on them instead of getting rid of them altogether, and then still being able to retain that ownership. And we think that it's, an opportunity for people to experience newness in their closets on the borrowing end. So if you don't
mm,
want to own something forever, but you want to
sure.
participate in a trend, just borrow something instead of buying it and getting rid of it the next day that you don't want it anymore.
Right. And what's the distinction, Allie? Educate us a little bit around. So you have what people always call like your staple pieces that you hold on to. Like I have like a gray wool blazer that will like probably never go out of style for men, right? Like men can always put on a
Right.
gray wool blazer. And I spent a lot of money on it, but I didn't mind because I've had it for 10 years, right? And it is like
Hmm.
that staple piece. So is the difference the staple pieces you're just wearing more often, more seasonality to them than some of these more, I think you called them signature pieces or specialized pieces that you might have in your wardrobe?
Yeah, I can give you sort of the origin story of Borrow too, because I think we
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, let's get
jumped
into it.
over
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But so the Borrow origin story resonated from a super personal pain point in me and my co-founders' lives, where we were in our late 20s. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was May of 2022. We were sitting on her couch. I had flown out to visit her in LA, and she had been a fashion stylist for about 8 years at that
Mhm.
point in the LA area. And so fashion was always something that we were really passionate about. I
Sure.
hadn't necessarily directly worked in the industry, but it's something that I love finding
Personally,
new.
yeah,
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 it
yeah.
was something that was important to me. And I remember we were sitting on her couch and we each had 6 weddings coming up that summer. Um, and we were just like, this is so like expensive and wasteful to just
Yeah,
buy a
sure.
new outfit for every event you have to go to. And while I was sitting there was thinking of the 10 things I had in my closet that I could potentially wear to one of those events, but I'd already worn them and I wanted to wear something
Right. You want
new.
something
And
new and yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so we were like, and her and I borrowed amongst ourselves. We have a larger friend group that we borrow amongst. But I think that, even those options, you run out of them eventually. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just want to wear stuff that, you see on friends of friends, or you see people you follow on social media. You like what they're
Sure.
wearing. You wish that you could wear that. And so we realized that there was this opportunity of like, wow, how much product do we actually think is hanging underutilized in people's
People's
closets across the
closets. Yeah,
country?
sure. Talk about
Uh,
amazing. Talk about untapped inventory, right?
right,
Yeah.
and so we spent just the next, I would say, 2 months talking to people to understand like, how do you actually have stuff hanging in your closet that you'd feel comfortable renting out, or would you feel comfortable borrowing something from a stranger? Have you
Mm,
used platforms like Rent the Runway before?
sure. Yep.
What has been your experience with rental? Are you open to it? And the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. A lot of
Sure.
people we spoke to even were like, I've had that idea
Right.
actually. And so we knew we were onto something. And so I taught myself how to use Figma, which is a design
I know Figma.
platform,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's awesome.
um, to just build out the early
Start building some
wireframes.
mocks. Yeah.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
build out the early wireframes of what the product could be. And, we ended up finding a developer who was great and he helped us build out the MVP of the product. And since then, it's just been constantly expanding for, the different use cases that
Sure.
we initially imagined. So we initially built it out for this very specific market, like women going to weddings in their late 20s. And we
Mm,
realized, we launched it in the App Store in October of 2024 or 2023. We're now in
23. Yeah, just
2024.
now. Yep. Yep.
We have it, yes. I mean, that's not wedding season, and so we've
Right. Yeah. Well,
through
late
that,
fall, not really. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we've through just like experimenting and running different tests, we've realized, okay, like in the non-wedding months, who's going to be using this product? Who are we building this product for? And so
Mm,
we've been experimenting with different, like you mentioned, use cases. Like maybe it's not a wedding guest gown, but maybe it's like an outfit you want to wear to your 30th birthday party, or maybe
sure. Or
it's
other
some,
holiday events coming up, right? We've
yeah,
got a lot of holiday parties, company parties, these things. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's where we find that rental is the most impactful within these like single use purchase categories. So
Instances. Sure. Yep.
it's not like we don't see a lot of people uploading like their favorite pair of jeans to the platform because you're gonna miss those if they're
Not
gone
my
from your
truth jeans. Those aren't
right.
going up there.
Exactly. But you're going to miss those if they're
Right.
missing from your closet for a week. And so that's where we are really focused right now, is like those pieces that are special to you that maybe you spent a little bit of money on, but you
Hmm.
don't wear all the time.
Right.
Um, that's where
Right.
we've been able to kind of have a lot of impact. And on the converse side, it's trying to push people to, instead of running to a fast fashion store and spending $50 on something that was probably not ethically or sustainably made, is probably
Right.
going to fall apart
The
after one or
quality's
two
not
wears.
there. Sure.
you
Yep.
know, Spend that money on a piece that is really nice and high quality through
Sure.
rental, because you don't need to own everything. I think that
Right.
we've gotten into this pattern as consumers that we're just over consuming, and we just feel like we need to own everything and buy
Sure.
everything. And I think what we're really trying to do is change consumer behavior to understand you don't actually need to do that.
Right.
Most of us can't afford that. Most of us don't have the square footage in our apartments to be able to accommodate that. And so rental is this awesome opportunity for people to both experience newness in their closets at a fraction of the price, but also to make this money back on these investment pieces that they have bought thoughtfully over a course of
Right. And
time.
have curated and have held on to it, taken good care of them and all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting, Allie, because looking at it from a little bit from the male perspective, I was in a similar situation to you in my late 20s. I had one
Hmm.
summer. I was in 4 weddings in one summer, right? All my male
Right.
friends were getting married at the same time. I was in all 4 weddings. But for men, it's like, oh, go and rent a suit at the
Yeah,
tuxedo shop on the corner. And it was like, it's so normalized for the male experience, right? To do that. Like you need a formal
totally.
suit, you don't buy it, you rent it, right?
Right.
So, you know,
100%.
yeah.
And I was going to say too, like, it's funny, like, as I've been on this journey and like even speaking with male investors, I had one man say to me, why do you need to own more than one dress? And it's like, do you have a wife or daughters or sisters or a
Yeah.
mother? Like,
Yeah.
have you not, like, I think that it's it is a uniquely, like female problem, I think, because I think that,
Fair enough.
like,
Fair enough.
yeah,
But
like,
I can see a use case for men
yeah,
to use your platform as well. Absolutely.
totally.
Yeah,
A hundred
absolutely.
percent, a
Yeah.
hundred percent. But I think that, like, for example, last 2 summers ago, my co-founder had a wedding where the dress code was tropical glitter glam, I think was
Oh my
the dress
Lord.
code. And it's like, it's for things like that, where it's like, what do you buy for that?
How
What
do
do
you
you
buy
wear to
something that's
that?
tropical glitter glam? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the process for finding something like that? And I think that, men can get away with wearing a nice suit. And I think
Yeah.
that that's not always the same for women who want to wear dresses.
Absolutely. Especially when you're trying to be respectful to a theme that maybe the bride or whoever's hosting the party has put a lot of thought into, when you really want to, it's part of the fun and you want to go along with that, right? So I
Right,
appreciate that.
for sure.
Talk to us a little bit, Allie, about the experience. So how does it work? Walk us through how I go in and I borrow a piece from the borrow platform, or I lend a piece to the borrow platform.
Mhm.
And how do you deal with the pricing aspect? How is that set? I'm curious as to how all this works.
Yeah, so when we were designing the platform, we borrowed a lot of um, components from platforms that our users already used. So a
Yeah,
lot of
sure.
stuff
You mentioned a
from
couple before. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so a lot of like a lot of the same functionality as Instagram. There's a social component to our app.
Mhm.
A lot of the same components as like a Depop or a Poshmark, so other
Sure.
peer-to-peer resale
But those
platforms.
Depop is this you sell, right? You don't necessarily rent,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but we borrowed a lot of like UX inspiration
Sure,
from
makes
those
sense. Yeah,
platforms.
because
Uh,
the experientially it should be relatively the same, I would assume, right? Yeah.
right, yeah, 100%. And
Yeah.
so you, as a user, just you log on, you make an account, you have a profile that you can upload pieces from your closet to. You take a couple of photos, upload a couple of photos, write a little description,
Mm,
set the price as you mentioned. So right now it's all pure set the same way it is on Depop or Poshmark. We have
gotcha.
a pricing guideline so we can help you assist, like if you need help
Right,
pricing
like
your
I
item.
don't know what this piece would be. I know what I paid for it, but I don't necessarily understand like what it would rent for, right?
Right,
Yeah.
totally. And it's a like a just a simple math, honestly, depending on how many
Yeah.
times you want to rent it out, what the cleaning of that garment might cost you, and then we help you price it.
Hmm.
It gets listed in your closet. If you want to borrow something from me, you find the listing, request the dates that you want to borrow the item for. Right now, we're doing it in 1 week and 2 week blocks.
Like increments.
Uh,
Okay. Yep.
and then it gets sent to the owner of the garment. As the owner, I have the right to accept or deny the request. If I
Hmm.
accept the request, I get two prepaid shipping labels emailed to me. So one will go on the package to get it there, and then one will go in the package to get it
Get it back.
back.
Yep.
The person borrowing the item wears the dress or whatever they've borrowed, ships it back to the
Mhm.
owner of the garment. I care for and clean the garment as I see fit, and then I withdraw the funds directly to my bank account. So it's a
Nice.
very simple user flow, not
Nice.
super complicated. Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. And Borrow makes money on every transaction. Is that how you guys, the economic model for you?
we do. Yeah. So right now that's how we're making our money.
Yeah. Have you thought of other alternatives as you think about the longer term? Like, would you ever go to like a subscription model where people pay like a flat fee per month? Or I'm sure you've probably already walked through or worked through some of those different economic models.
Yeah. So I think as I mentioned, the peer-to-peer marketplaces are definitely our first offering and
Yeah, your
our point
first
of
use
focus
cases.
right now.
Yeah,
But where we really see the impact for Borrow is, from a top-down perspective, starting to
sure.
work with these brands, starting to work with these stylists to manage their own internal rental programs
Mm.
through Borrow's
Through
software.
Borrow,
So
like you would be the intermediary in the platform for them to do that.
correct. So almost like an operating system for brands
Right.
to be able to manage their own
Sure.
internal rental programs. Because we've seen
Sure.
a lot of interest from small brands who can't afford to be on a platform like Rent the Runway. So Rent
Right.
the Runway obviously has inventory minimums. There's cost minimums to be on a platform like Rent the Runway.
Sure.
Because they are holding all of the inventory themselves, they're purchasing this stuff. They have all those overhead costs. They
Mm.
can't afford to work with small independent designers that,
Designers.
maybe
Sure.
don't make the amount of inventory that larger brands
Right.
do.
Right.
Um, and so we see a lot of opportunity for those small brands to be able to enter the rental
Nice.
space through our software. And so to your initial question of business models, I think that we're still figuring that stuff out, but I definitely
Right.
think that there's, on the B2B side, a way for us to integrate there as well.
I love the notion on the B2B side of you guys becoming the infrastructure for the smaller style houses to, like you say, the operating system for these smaller style houses to actually run their platform on, right?
Yeah,
That's a
totally.
great vision. That's absolutely. Talk to us a little bit. You mentioned, there were some established players in the space, and those established players obviously have some good, some bad associated with them. You have, some uniqueness to your value proposition and your use cases. But, how was the challenge? How did you sort of surmount some of the challenges associated with like, well, I don't need Borrow because I can use this other platform. Like, talk to us a little
Mhm.
bit about how you worked through those challenges.
Yeah. So I think that like initially the main player is Rent the Runway. Obviously, that if when you say
Yeah.
rental fashion, everyone goes to Rent the Runway. We get asked all the time, how are you different from Rent the Runway?
Of course,
And
I meant that's the first question. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that we just didn't see ourselves reflected in that inventory
Sure.
came time to actually, go through the process of renting something for an event. We didn't see ourselves reflected in any of the brands or styles that they had. And I think that, like I mentioned, it's just a shortcoming on their inability to work with small, more independent
Smaller.
designers.
Yes. Yep.
So I think like where we really provide value is because we don't have the responsibility of purchasing this inventory, of holding this inventory ourselves, we can allow our users to dictate the trends on our platform. So if
Sure.
there's so many really interesting, and I'm not sure if you're on TikTok or social media, but there's so many interesting subcategories within fashion that emerge, every couple
Right.
of weeks. I think that there was like cottage-core trends, and then there's the mob wife aesthetic, and there's so many different
Yeah.
fun things that pop up. And if you want to participate in that stuff, you have to go out and buy it.
Right.
You haven't traditionally been able to rent it.
Sure.
But
Right.
what we can do is connect someone who has a leopard print jacket in their closet hanging there with someone who
Right.
wants to borrow it for the weekend. We can easily just connect them. We're just the market maker. We don't have to buy that leopard jacket for then you to rent it from us. So it
Right.
makes it really easy. And we're allowed, like, that allows us to carry such a breadth of
Yes.
inventory in a variety of sizes and styles. And
Sure.
so that's like definitely our main differentiator, is just sort of being that connector. And then additionally, we're working with a bunch of stylists out in LA. So I mentioned my co-founder's background is in styling. She has a
Sure.
ton of, networks out there. Stylists have so much inventory that's just sitting there most of the
Right.
year.
Right.
And they, are already participating in the rental model. So they are
Mhm.
renting it out to clients for events or to
Sure.
brands for different shoots or short films. And so what we're doing is helping them, onboard their stuff to the platform. They have a ton of really interesting stuff that they've collected over their careers as
Mm.
stylists that they're then able to reach more people through the
Right.
platform.
Right.
So I think that our main differentiation is definitely the type of inventory that we have and the
I
way
like
that
it.
we're connecting people. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So many questions. I've had other clothing entrepreneurs on this show that you may or may not have heard, and I know it's such a tricky and complicated algorithm, if you will, for your inventory, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one of the clothing entrepreneurs I had on the show a little while back, I said, are you adding new things to your collection? And she said, I can't right now because I have too much inventory that I need to sell before I can add new
Mm-hmm.
to my collection.
Right.
And that's more in the buying and selling world. I didn't even think about how this impacts, like you say, stylists who have curated things and added them to their collection. And this is a great opportunity for them to have a medium for that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
to that point too, like with brands who, I think there's a lot of opportunity on the merchandising side for brands. Like
Sure.
maybe you don't have to buy 1,000 pieces of one SKU. Maybe
Right.
you can,
Right.
maybe you can buy 500 pieces of that SKU and, rent out a couple of those
Right.
pieces versus selling them
Sure.
and make the same
Sure.
return on your investment margin
Sure.
wise, which is ultimately how we see a lot of that helping the fashion industry become more circular. I think that
Great.
it's a top-down problem. And I think a lot of this stuff, is more of a regulatory issue where
Right.
things are just, we need to put limits on how many pieces of clothing are being produced every year. It's an
Right.
astronomical number, and the amount of waste that's coming out of how much is produced is also astronomical. And I
Crazy.
think
Yeah.
that, I read a report a couple of weeks ago about how the single most thing that we can do as consumers to be more sustainable is just wear the things that we already have. And so how can we extract the most wear and the most value out of the things that we already have? That's through rental and resale,
That's
but like
great.
hands down. And so I think that that's, where we're seeing the market going and the industry going, and that's how we want to have impact long term.
Sure. I have two other use case questions for you that I'm sure you've already thought about, but they both just came to mind during the context of our conversation. One is sort of the notion of like multiculturalism, right?
Mhm.
So, let's say that I'm going to an event that is specific to a culture that I'm not a part of, but I want to be respectful to that. I'm sure there's an opportunity within that for folks to get garments that are like culturally appropriate potentially.
For sure. Yeah. Indian weddings are a huge use case.
Yes, I would
There's,
imagine. So that's
yeah.
actually what I was specifically thinking of because I'm going to an Indian wedding this summer. So,
Yeah, yeah. There was actually this really cool Indian rental company that came out of, I believe it was Northwestern.
mm,
Um, it was called Look, and it was a Indian dress rental program. And I think that they were onto something there. They shut it down for whatever reason, but I do think that there's a huge market opportunity there. But like you
Yeah,
mentioned, there's so many opportunities for people to share their culture or to,
I love it.
want
Yeah.
to make people feel more included in those types of events. So
Yeah.
definitely.
The second use case to it, again, I'm sure you guys are thinking through this or are already accommodating that. Is I know I donate. There's a university not far from me. They have a campus closet, and I know that I donate my
Mhm.
clothing to that campus closet to be utilized either for one, students who potentially just are in a socioeconomic status where they just need everyday clothing,
Mhm.
or like donating old suits of mine and things that could be then utilized for a student starting their interview process and they don't have the money to go out and buy, professional clothing to begin their interview process, but man, they could spend something to rent a suit from you folks, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Totally. Yeah. And we would love to, as we start to grow, to build out more things like that, to be able
yeah.
to be philanthropic in some way or give back
Sure.
in some way. So definitely something that's top of mind.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned how you send the labels, and I'm assuming then the person is actually responsible for the packaging to put the garment into and all of that stuff, right? So, is the labeling, so you're covering the cost of the shipping there today, right? I know like with some other companies like Depop, like you will ask the buyer to cover the shipping. They may or may not choose to cover the shipping, so then you as the seller may have to cover the shipping. Are you getting into all that nonsense, or are you just kind of keeping it clean for now?
Yeah. So there's a standard shipping fee on each transaction. So it's $18, gets it
Oh,
there
I
and
see.
back.
Okay, got it.
The person borrowing is responsible for that. I think that long term too, we're seeing a lot of interest in like localized pickup and drop off. So if
Oh,
you're
I
in the
love that
same
idea.
city,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So if you're in the same city, being able to day of even see that
right.
there's an outfit that, someone a couple neighborhoods over has that you want to borrow for the night, be
Yeah,
able to just easily circumvent the shipping logistics and pick it up
right.
locally. So that's something that's in our roadmap that we're building out. But right
I
now
love
we're
that.
keeping it pretty simple with the shipping so that you can just print out the labels or have the labels printed for you at the post office. And then you can use the priority shipping boxes to get it there because the labels
Perfect.
are 2 day shipping. Make it really easy. You can use one of the boxes or one of the envelopes, and then you can reuse it to get it back.
That's great. Oh, that's awesome. I want to switch gears a little bit back to an original comment that you had made, Allie, about, sometimes you're speaking with male investors and, there's a little bit of a like, well, I don't understand. Like, I just, go, how many dresses do you need? Or, rental of formal wear for men has been normalized for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about, again, this is a show that is dedicated to women entrepreneurs. Let's talk a little bit about some of your experiences in talking with either male investors or, maybe just some of the challenges that you've, encountered as a female entrepreneur.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that women receive less than 3% of all VC funding. I think that that's a
Yes,
common stat that's shared around. I think that I've been lucky to have a lot of people in my network that are so supportive and are willing
that's
to
great.
make those connections for me. And I think that I would say like my one piece of advice would be that it's so important to just build that network. I
Yes.
think that there's been weeks where I've every single night have been at an event where I'm just networking and talking with people. And I think there's a lot of value in having face-to-face conversations to really show people you're
Mm,
passionate about this idea. But I do think that as a woman entering those spaces, it can be quite challenging.
sure. Yeah.
Um, and even like when we were on the hunt for our like technical lead, I remember
Mm,
my co-founder and I showed up to this event. It was it was a tech event here in Boston, and we walked in and we were the only two women that were there, and it was very overwhelming. And
yeah.
there's not a lot of, everyone there was so welcoming and supportive, but I think that
Sure.
there's a lot of, you know, to even enter into those spaces, it can be intimidating for
Sure.
women. And I think that I've experienced that for sure.
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot of questions around, we're an all female team building a fashion tech company. There's a lot of, it can
Right.
be scoffed at sometimes.
Right.
No,
Because they're like, oh, it's just a bunch of people doing something fun. It's not serious. It's,
a
yeah.
100%, but it's,
Yeah.
exactly. And I
It's
think,
tragic. It's
but
tragic. Yeah.
when you look at it, it's like the fashion industry is a $3 trillion industry. Some of the most wealthy people in the world are the heads of these major fashion houses.
Yeah.
It's a huge financial opportunity for anyone that wants to be a part of it. So I don't think that just because we're not building something
Right.
that's in a specific industry that we should be looked at as any less than anyone else. And
Well,
so,
and I think people forget too that fashion, it's synonymous. It's a necessity, right? I mean,
right,
both
100%. You're always going to need food, water, and something to wear.
and
And
clothing. Yeah, absolutely. You
and
know, that you
so
talk
for
about
sure.
those mantras of gratefulness, and you think about, well, like, I woke up today and I had food, I had water, and I had clean clothes, right? Like
Right.
those are like, so to I think it is short-sighted potentially for investors to think about a fashion entrepreneurial endeavor as being like not worthy of their time and attention, right?
Right. And I don't think that it's to anyone's fault necessarily,
Sure.
but I
No,
do,
yeah, I
yeah,
get that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. But I think that yeah, just have like conviction in what you're saying is something that
Sure.
I've really had to teach myself and get over the imposter syndrome of being like, I do deserve to be in this room and I do
Right.
deserve to be at
Absolutely.
this dinner and having these conversations. But it takes time to get there. And
Yeah.
in the beginning, it was really challenging for me, like to get out of my own head. But,
Sure.
through I think it's just been exposure therapy at this point, just going to so many of these things.
Ripping
But
the Band-Aid off. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Allie, you mentioned your roadmap and some of the ideas that you guys are continuing to work through in your B2B and your B2C, then eventual B2B. And you talked about how you just launched back in October of 2023. So let's talk a little bit about, what are the next major milestones if you're comfortable sharing them. You don't have to be super specific, but what are the next major milestones you folks are really driving hard towards right now?
Yeah, so we were actually just accepted into a summer accelerator program, which
Oh,
is really exciting.
fantastic. Yeah.
So this summer we'll be really heads down on the tech roadmap in particular. We've been just super, super focused on user feedback. So I mentioned
Nice.
we launched in October. We haven't put any marketing dollars behind that launch just yet. So it's all been organic social,
Word of
organic
mouth and
traction,
yeah,
word of
sure.
mouth,
Yeah. Yeah.
referrals. So I think that the next, because we do want to just make the experience really great for the people who are already using the platform and make sure
Mm,
that they're having a really good time and that they're having a good
mm,
experience before we start before we start marketing it out at scale.
sure.
So I think that we've been just really focused on understanding what people are liking about the platform, trying to hear from our users to inform the product roadmap, things that they would love to see in the platform, things that
Awesome.
are, clunky or disjointed for them in the process.
Mhm.
And then building that out into our tech roadmap. And then, yeah, this summer, I think we're going to be really focused on executing on a lot of those
That's
initial
great.
points of feedback. Yeah.
That's awesome. And just getting it done, getting it out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a product background, as you may or may not be aware. So I'm always excited to talk with folks like yourself that are going through right now you're past the discovery stage. You're in sort of you've got your founding partners that are using the product. You're pulling in all that feedback. It's informing your roadmap. You're preparing really for your big launch out to the so you can see that huge jump in users. So this is an
Yeah.
exciting time, Allie, and this is awesome.
Yeah, no, it's been so exciting and everyone has been so positive and helpful. And I
Yeah,
think like we've been really great at building a community of people who are excited to help. And so,
that's great.
even though I'll get like a 11 p.m. text sometimes from a friend who's like, just want you to know that I wish that I could select more than 2 color choices I'm, but
Noted.
it's, yeah, I'll add it to the list, but it's been really great to get all that feedback and to have a community of people who are so encouraging and supportive.
I love the sustainability, overtone that you folks are really, like we're living in a world now where, like you said, we have massive overconsumption. There's not a lot of thought always given to sustainability, climate impact, what have you. You mentioned fair labor, so many ways that you can be impactful, Allie, with what you're doing here. So the germination of your idea of renting garments to something that really can have this significant global impact and a more sustainability in the fashion industry. What are you most hopeful for, and what are you sort of most fearful of, Allie?
I think we're most hopeful for just being able to change consumer behavior altogether
Nice.
to this model of I don't need to own everything.
Right.
Because I do think that it is like a toxic way of consuming anything.
Right.
So I think that, and I'm already seeing the shifts in the way that consumers have been behaving in the past couple of years. So I think that we're
Nice.
really hopeful for this adoption of the rental model more holistically moving forward.
Hmm.
And then I guess fearful, I'd have to think about it. I think I would really love to see more change coming from these big brands. And I think that
Yeah.
I'm fearful for the way that they're continuing to operate and the
Yeah,
way
some
that
of them are
that is.
definitely pushing out the fast fashion industry is so frightening sometimes, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm fearful of the lack of, regulation there and the lack
sure.
of accountability. Because I think we've been led to believe as consumers that a lot of it's our fault, but it's
Hmm.
really not. I think that we
Right,
don't have the control that a lot of these big corporations do, and I think
right.
we can
Well,
do
and
as
look,
much.
they're using all kinds of techniques against us, right? And
100%. Yeah.
yeah,
And I would love to, I'm really hopeful that there will be some change there from a top down perspective within the next couple of years to be able to make it so that we don't have to feel this immense amount of guilt and
right.
pressure as the end consumer, because it's not our fault and we shouldn't have to feel that
Right.
way.
Awesome. Allie, you're awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell us your story.
Yeah,
Tell us the story of Borrow. We wish you nothing but tremendous success. And I love speaking with other folks in the Boston ecosystem. So thank you also for that.
of
And
course.
we'll be keeping a quick eye on you guys through the summer and next year. And I know you guys are going to just be volcanic. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. This was great.